Welcome back to Old Ducati Girl. I want to talk about motorcycle aesthetics, namely motorcycles and the aesthetics of ugly. So, a discussion of aesthetics could do worse than to start with Plato. Loosely paraphrasing Plato, Plato said that there was a relationship between truth and beauty. And he said that you might not always be able to tell what's true, but if you go with what's beautiful, you're probably not too far off the mark. So let's begin, shall we? Thank you. Although aesthetics can be viewed as a matter of opinion, I do think there are things we can say about aesthetics and motorcycles. And I want to start with the bell curve. We all know about the bell curve. Most things in human endeavors follow the bell curve. Human height. You could say that there's a few really short people, a few really tall people, and everyone else is in the middle somewhere. And I think the same thing can be said for motorcycles. There's a few motorcycles that have terrible performance in the most general sense. There's a few motorcycles with extreme performance, and most motorcycles are somewhere in the middle. The same can be said of riders. There's a few riders that are abysmally bad riders. There are most riders in the middle, and there's a few riders, end up in MotoGP. So those form bell curves quite naturally. Now, if you take those two curves and overlay them, this is what you see. There's two bell curves, but they don't coincide. What you have is in a situation where most riders can't ride their motorcycle at its extreme of performance. And increasingly, people are buying an aesthetic of performance and not really buying the bike for performance. That's one of my basic points. Most of what motorcycles are about is the aesthetic. And I put an X on this chart down at the low end, just slightly above abysmal, and that's where I place myself here. This bike's 56 horsepower. It handles about like a 7-foot section of wet telephone pole. However, my riding skills are slightly above abysmal. So we fit well together. And so I'm not really in this mismatch all that heavily. But my contention is most riders are really not going to ever use their machine either legally or even on a track at its performance level. And so there again, it's a matter of aesthetics. In the 1950s, young British motorcyclists developed a term called the ton up. When they had been able to go 100 miles per hour on their British motorcycle before some vital part shook itself loose, it was a badge of honor. They had done 100 miles per hour and they said, I've done the ton up. In the modern era, speed and power in a motorcycle has become trivial. The industry and motorcycling, in a sense, has become a victim of its own success. You can buy a motorcycle today, walk into the dealer's floor, and walk out the door with the keys to a motorcycle which will do 200 miles per hour. And whether the bike does 199 or 202, it really doesn't make any difference. And this has led to something which I call the aesthetic of speed. Speed is no longer a useful distinction in motorcycles. People are buying the aesthetic. In an era where the production of motorcycles capable of 200 miles per hour has become trivial, manufacturers have to compete on some other basis than speed. And the basis on which they'll compete is the aesthetic of speed. Or I should say the cartoon of speed. This is an example of that. This yellow monstrosity with outlandish bodywork panels, slashing graphics. It is a cartoon of fast. And one other way we can tell that we're really not interested in speed anymore is that manufacturers are putting built-in restrictors on the electronics which make the motor function. They're limiting their engines to 186 miles per hour. That would be unthinkable in the 50s or 60s. There was a true competition for speed, but not anymore. Compare that with the Vincent. The Vincent was an extraordinarily fast motorcycle. It was 20 or 30 miles per hour faster than anything else out there. But it looked more or less like another British motorcycle. It did not have to look different. It was different. So I've briefly made the case that I consider aesthetics to be the dominant and most important aspect of a motorcycle. So let's talk now about some of the tributaries that form the aesthetic of the motorcycles that we see around us today. The first thing I want to talk about, and not in any particular order, is noodling. This image here is an example of noodling. This is a spaceship from the Star Wars movie. All the bumps and protrusions, tubes, vents, louvers, pipes, and gobbledygook that is stuck all over the spaceship is called noodling. It's a cinema term, and it came from the fact that the engineers who build these things spend a lot of time gluing little bits and pieces onto the model like macaroni. And so the purpose of noodling, or the communication of noodling, is that it communicates an alien technology, an advanced technology, and a mysterious technology. Noodling in motorcycles shows up in the principle I call complexity being a proxy for quality, where it's difficult to distinguish different bikes on a performance level. Manufacturers have to compete on features, which may or may not be useful at all. And take, for example, my sister's clothes dryer. It has 56 drying cycles possible. I have a Maytag in the house. It has 3 drying cycles, 2 of which I use. Now, take a look at this BMW motorcycle. I'm not talking about its engineering, but visually, it's a heap. It's a jumble. It's visual chaos. However, what it's telling the buyer is, all my complexity works to your benefit, whether you understand it or not. And that's the purpose of noodling. The next tributary of ugly is represented by an image which I've shown you several times. This headlight and fairing assembly from a well-known adventure bike. So now it's time to talk about it. It's a cross between a Japanese space robot, Darth Vader's helmet, and it's a cartoon image of stylized aggression. It's not that surprising, as the bikes are going to be marketed to a people who grew up on Star Wars and Transformer monster robots. It also suffers from excessive noodling. It's over-engineered and over-embellished. It's a visual clutter. And what will be next year's model? Will it have 6 headlights, or 10 headlights, or 12 headlights? Must be better than 10. The bike is likely to become the veritable image of Argus rolling down the road. Let's next talk about the problem of resemblance. Bikes to me look too lumpy and too tall. However well engineered they may be, there's still the problem of resemblance. When I see a bike like this, I can't help thinking of this. Plastic is a wonderful engineering material when used sparingly. I watched a video that someone had produced of the 10 most beautiful motorcycles ever. Half of them had full fairings. And I thought about this for a minute, and I said, well, if we took all the fairings off bike A, which is the most beautiful bike, and made brackets and screws and nuts, and put all those fairings on bike B, which was an ugly bike, wouldn't that bike B then be the most beautiful bike? What are we talking about here? So we can sum up by returning once again to Plato. Plato said, beauty of style depends on simplicity. We live in a culture of disposable appliances, and I suppose it should come as no surprise that motorcycles are becoming just another plastic appliance, packed with an ever-increasing array of features and electronic gizmos, soon to be forgotten after the faux chrome starts to peel off the plastic. So I want to leave you with an image. This is a Ferrari 275 GTB coupe built in 1966. When you look at this car, and especially if you walk up to it in person, it makes you stop for a moment. It looks somehow unfinished, like it was taken out of the factory before it was quite completed. It is so unadorned. And then the brilliance and forcefulness of the design really hits you. Now that's style. Thanks for watching.
Well, I can only suppose she's told you all about the shortcomings of the modern motorbike. She hates them. But let me tell you about her shortcomings. Yes. I can tell you, she drops the bike in the flower bed when she comes home. She doesn't know how to use the brakes. And the neighbors, they have to help her get it started and push her. I can't stand it.